Well, ahead of notable data points in the week, the Rand has already started shedding its position. Brigid Taylor is chairperson of Kaon Capital and joins us now. Hi, Brigid. So when I was at the wall there, I said 12 Rand 26 took a bit of a start because it's been moving in that sort of 12.05, 12.07, maybe 12.10 for a while. Sudden, sharp decline.
It has been a sudden decline, and I think that we're all aware that the Rand is likely to be a little bit more vulnerable on the upside with regards to its general trajectory. But the concern right now is we've got non-farm payrolls on Friday. That's the US non-farm payrolls. That's a big number because one of the market indicators around whether or not the Federal Reserve will decide to hike interest rates is that. Then on top of that, we've had great data out of the US recently. And then we've got this Fitch waiting on Friday, which bodes negatively. So it's this cloud of uncertainty around South Africa with regards to the outages in terms of electricity, what in fact is going to be our growth trajectory going forward, and what are we doing to maintain this economy. And I think that there will be some negative commentary around that in terms of the management of the economy. So I think from that perspective, we can expect the Rand to remain on a weaker bias for the remainder of this week, certainly.
Joseph?
What's going to weigh more, really? Is it the credit rating, say, if we get a negative outlook, or basically if America indicates firmly when they're going to raise their rates? What do you think really is going to be
well, it's very interesting because I think that the interest rate decision in the US is prime center in terms of what the market's watching. So if you look at global markets, whether it's the Eurozone, yes, we've got the Greek exit issues, we've got a couple of other issues, predominantly the growth scenario, etc. We've had German commentary. But it is about when they're going to hike interest rates. And I think that, if you look at the commentary that's come out of the Federal Reserve, it's been pretty conservative. So, yes, the data is pointing to a growing economy in the US, but they keep making mention of the likes of China and the Eurozone that are remaining on the back foot despite this continuous quantitative easing or availability of cash. So that's something that they're keeping in the back burner. The market's not pricing for a decision before sort of at the very earliest September and possibly later. However, the data does drive that type of sentiment. So for now, I think the positive US data, the market watching non-farm payrolls, and then coupled with a little bit of a negative undertone with regards to South Africa is not helping the Rand.
Brigid, they talk about the strong dollar and the weak Rand and how much is in our control and how much is beyond our control. What's your assessment at the moment of that ratio, if you like?
Well, I'd like to say that I think most of it's actually driven from offshore. However, I think that that's also forgives South Africa and the underlying fundamentals in our economy. Because if we look at the South African fundamentals, if you look at our growth, if you look at our potential inflation, which is not driven by consumer availability of cash, it's more as a function of cost push pressures that we can't control. So these are negative type inflationary pressures that potentially don't speak to growth, they just speak to less available cash in the consumer's back pocket. So those type of drivers, if you looked at South Africa purely on its own, would be relatively negative from a fundamental perspective. However, on a global bias, South Africa still offers great interest rates. I mean, if you look at the 186, which is our benchmark bond at the moment, that's trading at 8.2.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that story in the paper this morning about South African bonds, the longest monthly decline in 2 years. I didn't read the detail of the story, just saw it. And Michael Keenan of, I think, Barclays said, we may need to get these bonds to rise as high as 8.5%.
You see, what happens is, I mean, ultimately at the end of the day, people weigh up, what they do is they weigh up the weakness of the Rand. So if you're a foreign investor buying a South African bond, one of the things that can erode that return is the weakness of the Rand. So if you go in and you buy, so you exchange your dollars at 11 Rand 80, and you buy a bond, when you then go and you sell the bond and you go and exchange back for your dollars and you're doing it at 12.25, you've lost 2%. So is it worth your while if the currency is that volatile? So a lot of the questions that investors ask is, one, what is happening with regards to the underlying fragility? What does the volatility of the Rand look like? And we've been quite lucky because in South Africa, the Rand's traded within pretty narrow ranges. However, right now, with the underlying issues, we were talking about Eskom earlier, talking about SAA earlier, these type of investments are questionable. So you'd rather invest in a South African bond market, but what we talk about then is hot money. So it moves in and out quickly because why? It's very liquid. So for now, the Rand's weakening. Investors are remaining away. They're investing rather in a risk-free asset like a US Treasury, which is also showing quite good returns as a risk-free asset, and waiting for the bonds to weaken off further because then they can, one, exchange their dollars for at 12 Rand 30 and get in at those higher levels on the bonds. So they win on both sides of that equation. So if the Rand strengthens, they win, and they win if the rates obviously come back down.
I think barring volatility, we've seen that the rand basket sometimes takes massive swings. Yeah. Where do you put it? I think at some stage it went to about 1240. The last time I think it had its moves. Where do you see the rand going? Because if it does,
at its worst, yeah.
You know, your R186, which is currently the government benchmark bond, you might see it possibly touching 850.
Well, you're right. I mean, the rand obviously does impact the level of the bonds. So if you see the rand weaken, you will see the bond levels weaken. It's often as a function of the rand weakening because we see foreign investors moving away from South African assets. And because of that, you're seeing a selling of the bond market, which results in higher yields. However, I think that what we must keep in mind, and especially for investors out there, particularly those that are on the import side, is that the rand at the moment, on a technical bias, you're looking probably at about a 1205 on the bottom. Big resistance level at around 1180, 78 to 80. But on the top side, that 1225, if we go through 1225, then we're looking up towards that 1232, if not higher, as 1238. So we definitely are on that side of the bias, particularly now as there's this non-farm payroll number on Friday and because of this Fitch downgrade. So if we do in fact see a Fitch downgrade, we can expect to see rand weakness.
That is Brigid Taylor, as usual, packing a lot in. Thanks to her, she's chairperson of Kaon Capital.